Okay guys, we've been talking about the pain on the impingement on the hip of the hand. Most of it comes from hearing to rest it on the hip of the hand rather than rest it against. So firstly, let's take a real close look. Let me use a lightweight. Try and remove all space between the wrist and that handle, so it's absolutely flush. And by removing that space, you're less likely to have a pseudo hook grip. We've been doing this for so long with weights, hooking grip with barbells and dumbbells, that we create too much space with the kettlebell, right? And we rest it on the hip of the hand rather than against it. So one of the drills that I came up with that seems to remove all the slack for people is to be able to not use your thumb, but keep your hand absolutely perpendicular to the ground, all the way up to your fingers. Remove all of the space between here, angle it all the way down, so now it's actually resting against the hip rather than on the hip. When you rest it against, and people do this, they oscillate between resting on the hip of the hand or resting against it but with their elbow flare. So they might have the right contact with the hand, but they flare the elbows out in order to do it. So what we have to do is we have to stab the elbow down to the iliac crest and keep the handle resting against the hip. You can do it in a double rack by keeping your hands facing each other, with your palms facing each other, fingers up. You'll be able to stab both elbows, get that long curve the spine with thoracic flexion. Stab both elbows down, but keep that relationship of your palms facing each other so that you take out all of that slack. Okay? So that's resting against the hip of the hand, these two bones, rather than on the hip. And that'll take out some of the compression, as we're getting a lot of lateral deviation compression here, squeezing down because you're flexing and loading a small bone, actually two small bones. So the first drill that you can actually work on is lateral deviation on the wrist. Look that it's not flexion and extension, lateral deviation. So imagine that you're holding on to a ratchet and trying to move it, right? If you don't have much lateral deviation at first, that's okay. Just keep on working. It takes about 2 to 3 weeks to unload that and cavitate it and open it up and get lubricated in there. If you don't though, you keep on compressing that, you're going to eventually end up with something similar, if not carpal tunnel syndrome. The nerve impingement can be really painful even if you only start typing something, just little digital dexterity after loading it like that with a hook grip resting on the hip rather than against the hip. If you watch Valeri's technique, he can even bury 3 fingers underneath the handle because it's resting against, down, stabbed. Okay, so your first drill, lateral deviation on the wrist. Then work to finger pinch. I call it a finger roll. You move from an OK sign, all fingers stacked, to an ice cream cone, all fingers stacked, back and forth. And that's going to open up the bones across your hand down to your wrist. If you do this as a warm-up, you can notice that it's a lot like the spiral curve out of a snatch. That finger roll will be really helpful in keeping your hands and fingers lubricated, especially in between sets. And then finally, I'm going to take you down to the ground and I'm going to show you the seal walk. This is for opening up adhesions in your forearm muscles and all the way up to your upper arms. But really take it easy because this will look like a flexibility drill, but it's really not. Okay, this last exercise is a seal walk. Take your fingers, point them back at your center line. If you can't begin at your center line, just take them off at a 45-degree angle to begin with. The goal isn't to stretch the palm down. Don't press the palm down. You want to roll each digit one at a time, all the way down, flat to the ground. This will help counter the fact that you're constantly doing this motion, flexing in with your wrists. We need to move all the way into that full range of motion. So from an angle, turning back, roll each one. Get your elbow all the way locked and turn the nape of your elbow pit, directly forward. Don't let it roll out or you won't get full rotation. So that's the seal walk. When you do it in full motion, you should be able to walk dragging your legs with the seal walk. So that's your last exercise for number 2 mobility drill for kettlebell lifting.